and welcome to another episode of the Curiosity and Consciousness podcast with me, Karen Maloney. I'm delighted to be joined by Holly White today on the show. Holly is passionate about style, natural beauty, and vegan food. Holly is certified in plant-based nutrition and regularly hosts demonstrations showcasing an introduction to vegan cuisine. Her new cookbook, Veganish, is out now, and she has also recently collaborated with the Merrion Hotel in Dublin to create a sumptuous vegan menu. And during our chat, we discover why she decided to go vegan, the labour of love involved in creating her cookbook, the importance of self-care, and how choosing to eat a plant-based diet has affected other aspects of her life. Holly also leaves us with some tips on how people can begin to explore with vegan food. So Holly, thank you so much for joining me today on the show. I'm really excited to talk to you about all things vegan food and clean living and lifestyle. So you're very welcome.
Thank you so much. Delighted to be here.
Excellent. Now, I know towards the end of last year, you launched your cookbook, Veganish.
Yes.
So I'm really excited to talk about that in a little bit, and we will come back to it. But first of all, why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey towards moving towards veganism and like plant-based diet?
Absolutely. I suppose I've always been interested in cooking. I would have picked up a lot from, maybe even just helping my mum out as I was growing up. And then, I was always very kind of interested in, I suppose, all the different factors that come into what people might believe is sort of a healthy lifestyle. Like I'm really interested in, I love all makeup, and obviously I used to work in fashion as well. And I was really passionate about the connection between what I eat and how I felt. And I used to, years ago, I've actually spoken about it a bit. Years ago, I read a book called The Blood Type Diet, which suggested that I was supposed to eat a very high protein, low grain kind of diet. And for the bulk of my 20s, that was how I ate. And then around the time when I turned 30, I wasn't feeling well. I didn't feel great. And I think that's that very kind of cliche time where you do sort of reevaluate your life and you kind of look at things. And also I got Netflix and watched a lot of documentaries to include Earthlings, Forks Over Knives, Fat, Sick and Nearly Dead, and Cowspiracy. And I kind of went, this isn't sitting right with me, knowing the environmental impact and also accepting the reality that for me to eat meat, something had to actually be killed. And I think that's a very strange, shrouded part of our society. Like in terms of when you're in school, you'll have school trips to maybe a farm or you might go to a different workplace, but I don't know anyone personally who knows someone directly who works in an abattoir or who has even been in one. And the reality is when you see footage from what goes on, it can be extremely heartbreaking. And straight away I kind of said, this isn't sitting well with me. And I kind of made the decision overnight that I was going to reevaluate my diet. And suddenly, before I knew it, I was bookmarking all of these different vegan recipes. And there was a rise of food bloggers like Deliciously Ella, and then there's Oshi Glows. So I felt like I had a resource in terms of, it was great that there was people sharing really simple recipes. And I couldn't get over the difference. I couldn't get over the taste of the food, like simple things. Like I hadn't eaten pasta properly and enjoyed it in years. And suddenly I was eating, bowls of pasta, porridge, granola, making, really gorgeous chocolates, my juices, my smoothies. And I felt as if I was coming kind of back to life. And it's a decision that once I made, I've never looked back. And I've become really passionate about, I suppose, elevating people's perceptions around vegan food, because definitely what's been amazing is as I've traveled, you do have to tend to seek out places to find. But as a result, I think that's really broadened my horizons and my palate, because rather than going to, the traditional easy places around the corner, you might find yourself like going down a laneway or trying something interesting. But it's actually, I always thought that it would feel like I was giving something up, whereas actually I just feel like I've gained what I think is a much more interesting palate. And, equally when it comes down to travel and things like that, I think much more interesting experiences as a result of adopting the lifestyle.
That's fantastic. And I love the fact that you say that it kind of brought you back to life, because honestly, I know it's been my experience as well. Once you start making, the shift, and I'm not totally vegan, but I know that like what I do at home is pretty much all vegan. And funnily enough, my actual grandparents were butchers. They had a butcher shop here in town and their own abattoir. So I'm running one of those rare people who did see that side of things. But still, I never really liked meat as a child or anything growing up. So for me, it kind of felt more natural as well. But it's funny, you're probably one of the rare people who just decided overnight, it sounds like. For most people, it might be a gradual kind of progression. So that's really interesting in that. And I love as well that you want to help elevate people's perception as well, because and certainly from watching some of those documentaries, like you mentioned, especially Forks Over Knives. Oh my God, that was the most, I think, harrowing watch of my life. It is just so, the inhumanity and what you see happens in large scale productions. Like when you're
I think the thing is, a lot of them are American documentaries, and what you have, what you have is a very a close to home, actually, both, literally, experience. And I think that's fine. I suppose what I personally had was I was a product of city living. I was very disconnected. And I think the thing is that, you knew, if it was your grandparents and you understood the process. For me, I didn't. And I was very separated from it. And equally, I'm well aware that those documentaries, they are created to be somewhat sensational. They are also, a lot of them are American based, but also some people will watch them and go, that's a fact of life, that's absolutely fine, in the same way as some people aren't squeamish around blood and they're the ones that you want to be operating on you. But for me personally, I think I'd always been very sensitive, and I suddenly went, that doesn't feel right for me. And I'm well aware it's an each to their own kind of a thing, and different people can be exposed to the same materials. So I don't have a problem with meat in any way, shape or form, but I do think that people should develop, I think, what you have in terms of, if you can have more of a relationship with a butcher or understanding of where your meat is coming from, I think that's a brilliant thing. What I had was a complete separation. I didn't associate the meat or the produce that I was buying wrapped up in plastic in any way, shape or form. I was totally disconnected from it all. And when I connected the dots, I kind of went, actually, that doesn't feel right for me. But no one in my family is vegan whatsoever at all. But the great thing that I'm glad is that I think, they might come over for dinner and they'll enjoy vegan food and just call it dinner. It's not really about kind of labeling yourself vegan or not, or it's just a lifestyle that has really suited me, definitely.
Absolutely. And I think that's it. And I think that's why it's, absolutely everyone has free will choice, and it is, everyone's individual choice at the end of the day. And we're not here to push any agendas one way or another, but I think it is important to have the conversations, because like that, it is just opening up that other perspective, just actually creating an awareness and a space to actually stop and think and go, oh, maybe there is something better for me, or maybe, I can make better choices for myself and things like that. And I think that's the importance of it, and especially in having the conversations. And definitely, it's become, and it's not about people buying into trends either, just because something has become fashionable. Again, it needs to resonate. And I think, making that higher connection and that conscious decision to stop and think about things is kind of the crucial part at the end of the day for everyone.
And it's a funny thing as well, though, because if we were in India, like, you'd be eating lots of lentil dals and chickpea curries and things, and then equally when I was in Thailand, I've never been anywhere where it was easier to be vegan in my entire life. Like predominantly, meat is extremely expensive over there, and it would be normal to have plenty of vegan and vegetarian meals throughout your weekly diet. It's more what I don't fully understand is how the model came, where I suppose typically most people might feel like maybe they might have a fry in the morning, or, or a rasher sandwich, or, and maybe a ham sandwich at lunch and then meat at night. It's the fact that I think that some people feel that meat has to constitute every single meal, otherwise it's not a meal. And I just think it's really important that there are options to maybe dilute that down if people want to. But as I said, in Thailand, I couldn't get over how easy it was to eat there. And actually within a couple of days, I ended up doing a cooking course, because I was like, this is such a way of, living and eating. And any Indian restaurant as well equally will be able to just do phenomenal food. So
I loved Thailand and Asia and all their foods as well. It's just, the flavors and everything.
I know.
I think that's what people are afraid of sometimes. Like you say, it's more habit as well, and ingrained, and just kind of, often at times just what you do or what you're brought up with. Again, it's just trying to maybe stop and think about it again, and just, like you say, every meal doesn't necessarily have to have meat. And once you start kind of introducing new things and plants and vegetables and all these things, the flavors are unreal. And I think that's what people get scared of sometimes. They think it's just bland and boring. And maybe, you know, back in the day in Ireland, certainly, the options and choices were limited. But nowadays,
definitely.
there is so much choice and options out there. So it does. And I know even certainly loads of friends and people who do experiment, or they're trying to have a veggie day, you know, within their house or things like that, to try and incorporate more, because again, like that, once you start introducing them, you do feel so much better, because at the end of the day, they provide our body with the nutrients that we actually need, you know, that they need to repair and be at their optimum, that we then in turn feel better as well. So it's like a whole knock-on effect, but it's just starting with that little shift.
And it's the curiosity, I think, as well, because I always know that, like, especially now that I have a cookbook, I know that it could be on a, you know, on the shelf beside, I don't know, like how to cook a perfect steak. And people, I think it's great for people to follow their instincts, but definitely for me, I felt that I wasn't really listening to what felt right. I had read a book that said eat meat, but I wasn't following my heart or my instincts, if that makes sense. And once I kind of, you know, opened up my eyes a little bit and was able to follow what felt right for me, I started to feel so much better. But I suppose equally, one of the things that I'm really passionate about trying to do is elevating people's perceptions of vegan food, because well, recently I worked at the Merrion Hotel and I did a whole vegan menu for them, and there, the garden room, you know, it's beautiful, and it's not particularly formal, but it is, you know, it is very beautiful. It's a very special place. It might be somewhere where you'd go for, you know, a treat, or maybe on a Sunday, or a special dinner. But what I kind of wanted to do is, I think people have this perception of, you know, like maybe lots of, you know, group cooking, or, you know, kind of very casual vegan dining. And I kind of thought, no, like, why can't it also be, you know, for a really special meal? And in particular there, like working with Paul Kelly, who is the head pastry chef there, in terms of designing the desserts, I think they're world-class vegan desserts. And I think there's this idea that people don't associate vegan food with, you know, with glamour, or, you know, not formality, but that idea that it could also be really special food. It's kind of considered, you know, the cheap alternative, but it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, yes, it can be very reasonable to eat that way, but equally it can be really special. And it's lovely there because like, I hadn't had like a proper dessert out in Ireland in so long. Like, you might get maybe a fruit salad or maybe some sorbet, and you know, there we've got a crumble, we have a salted caramel tart, and then we have vegan meringues. And it was amazing because at the launch, one of the journalists came up to me and said, Holly, I haven't been able to enjoy a dessert in 8 years, because she was also lactose intolerant. And I think it's important also for chefs and, you know, people working in hospitality to understand that some people are vegan by choice, but also there's so many people with allergies such as eggs or dairy. And the great thing is that vegan food caters to them as well, because it's just about letting people feel like, you know, they're heard, there's options available for them, and that they're welcome at a table. Because I've been out at so many dinners where there's such beautiful care taken to, you know, maybe my friend's steak on one side and someone else's, you know, beautiful piece of fish, and then I'm literally given like a plate of vegetables, and you can feel slightly, you know, cheated. And I always advise people, you know, enjoy the company, enjoy your friends, but equally it'd be lovely if you could also enjoy your meal too.
Yeah, absolutely. Like that, things have come on so far now that it is, you know, and like you say, between yourself and loads of other people, you know, there's loads of people that chefs and that can look to for inspiration and ideas as well. And I know your vegan menu at Merrion looks absolutely phenomenal. The next time I'm in Dublin, I like even your Instagram and everything. They just look so beautiful and enticing, and like that, really high end and exquisite. Definitely not boring. Definitely not a fruit salad. I know a vegan friend of mine, she is just like, I am so over fruit salad. Like, you know, a lot of places, yes, they'll have vegan options now, but nothing on the desserts, like you say. And she's like, yeah, I'm just over fruit salads. So I think it's amazing, you know, creating that space as well. And definitely the next time I'm in Dublin, I want to check it out.
Wonderful.
But also your book. So tell us about your book, Veganish, that you launched. You launched it towards the end of last year.
Yeah, it came out in September. So it's funny because I actually keep just remembering exactly this time last year, when I was on my book deadline, like it was a huge, having never kind of written a book before, I didn't really have any idea in terms of how to actually stagger the workload. And I remember I felt really overwhelmed, and my book deadline was looming, and then the snow came, and then everything kind of seemed to shut down. So I felt like I had this extra week. So it feels very, I'm kind of looking at the sky now wondering, because I think everyone's worried the snow is going to come back again this year.
Everything conspired to help you to finish your book.
Yeah, no, it was great. And sometimes, you can get, there's always, I think around, creative projects, you always need a little bit of luck to be on your side. And with that book, I pitched it twice to Gil, and they said no. And they said, you need, the recipes need to be improved, and this needs to be a different and a new and a fresh message. And, to be honest, I've been freelance most of my life. So I take, I don't like using the word rejection, but I take constructive criticism quite well. And I went away and I did different cooking courses. I found it very tricky to actually train in vegan food. So I did raw food mastery and fermentation here in Ireland, and learned all about sprouting and making kombuchas and kimchi and raw chocolates and things like that. But then I found when I wanted to get a bit more into, different elements of vegan cooking, I had to go abroad. So I went over to London and I trained at the Wild Food Cafe. And then I went to Los Angeles and I trained in a place called Plantlab out there. And then along the way, I became certified in plant-based nutrition as well. And, I took it very seriously. And especially if you are doing, a book, it has to go beyond what someone else might be able to find out just doing a quick Google themselves. And it's, as I said, it's something I'm really passionate about, but passion can only get you so far. You have to back it up with time invested in education. And I really, I think the key thing that Gil was saying is, we've seen plenty of green smoothies, we've seen energy bowls. We need to see more interesting food and more recipes, because especially, by the time the book comes out in a year on, people who are interested in green, in green smoothies, they want the next thing as well. Yeah. So I was really glad about that, and I'm delighted I went abroad. And then when I kind of got a little bit more sophisticated with the recipes, then they said, yes, there's something here, we're delighted about this. And so it was a long process, and then submitted the book last March. Then we had the shoot in April, and then it sort of goes back and forth in terms of any final tweaks, design. And especially one of the things with vegan food that I feel is that there's so much colour kind of naturally in it, that in terms of, from a style point of view, I wanted everything to be quite neutral, to really let the food speak for itself. So it's funny that, of course I, love the food side of things, but you're involved at every level of these kind of creations. And then obviously then there was the marketing and the launch, and I was delighted. I co-hosted the press launch with Deliciously Ella from the UK, Ella Mills, which was really, again, kind of a bit of a dream come true. No, absolutely kind of, wonderful. So a lot of stress, a lot of excitement, and a huge amount of learning. So I'd recommend it to everyone, but I'd also say this will be, however much work you think it'll be 10 times more. And that, I think there's kind of a myth. I think people sort of feel that sometimes that people aren't as involved in their brand or in their work as they actually are. And, I think that it does a disservice to everyone. And even especially with Ella, I've never seen anyone work harder than the day she said that she had when she came over here to do the lunch and the launch. She was busy from 6 o'clock in the morning straight through till 6 o'clock the next day, going out to the Happy Pear to do the swim rise. And anyway, so busy times.
Yeah, no, and I think that's very true. And anyone who does, really, like you say, follow their passion, the time invested is huge. And again, it's huge and it's a passion, but also it kind of feeds you as well, because the benefits, there's a bigger picture, there's a meaning to it as well behind it all. And no, I think it's amazing, and well done as well on creating a cookbook. I know years ago when I worked with the Heart and Stroke charity in Galway, they did a cookbook, and the work that's involved in a cookbook, I don't think anybody realizes. It's a huge undertaking. So well done.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah. What I'm interested to know, what's one of your favorite recipes from the cookbook?
Well, actually the two that have gone into the Merrion, I'd be very happy with. The shepherdless pie, I love, and that's actually the bestseller in there, just because it flips that idea of like oftentimes I find when I go to restaurants and things like that, you get very bland, very plain food. I think there's a perception that maybe people, if they are vegan, that they're not interested in food, or that they just want to eat very lightly. And that's not it at all. And actually at the moment, my husband has signed us up for a 10-mile run next weekend. So we're doing a bit more running and a bit more training than usual, but you need really satisfying kind of hearty food. And with the shepherdless pie, like the base is sort of like a stew made with loads of lentils, which gram per gram contain more protein than beef, which people are always surprised by. And then there's walnuts, and then there's lots of miso paste. So it's really hearty, and then the mash on top is really, really creamy. And there's a product called nutritional yeast in it, so it gives it that kind of salty, not quite buttery, but that lovely kind of savory taste as well. So to be honest, that's one of my favorite dishes, and it's selling extremely well in the Merrion, which is really wonderful because it changes that perception of what is vegan food. And for me, it's so satisfying and so comforting.
Yeah,
and
so.
then
Amazing.
Yeah, and then there's a salted caramel tart that, again, I really like just because it's really special. And in the book, it's actually called a salted caramel celebration cake, which is like a really cheesy name. But I remember in the depths of like recipe testing, because sometimes things don't work and it's really demoralizing.
Yeah.
It's also really expensive because you just buy so much ingredients and then things just flop or don't work at all, and it's really it's really annoying. But then there's also these moments where something does work out slightly unexpectedly, and you're like, oh, this is great. So hence the very like cheesy name. But I was really excited about it because with traditional cooking, it's so, in some ways, it's so reliable. There's so many tested ways of, even if you wanted to make a Victoria sponge, or pancakes, or there's millions of recipes that you can try. They're all tested and they're all brilliant. Whereas I suppose with vegan cooking, there's so much exploration, and it's slightly frustrating when you have a taste or a texture or something that you're trying to create in your mind and you just can't get it right. And then anyway, when it does work, it's great.
Well, I think it's great that you added the name celebration as well, because like that, we do need to celebrate our triumphs, because like that, it resonates with you. You knew the pain and the struggle and what got you to that place. So why not put the name in there? So
yeah, that's where it is.
Yeah. But those places as well where you studied between Plantlab and the Raw Food Mastery and that, they sound like phenomenal. What were some of the,
fermentation was fascinating to do. Like there's different workshops that you can dip in and out of in terms of fermentation, and it's amazing. But what really surprised me was I think sometimes people can think like this way of eating is very new, but what's fascinating about when you go into fermentation and you realize actually historically it was a way of preserving vegetables long before we even had refrigeration or freezers or anything like that. And it's funny because you feel like you're remembering something that's kind of forgotten, and a lot of the techniques they tend to be quite simple, not necessarily easy, because again, you're dealing with a live product, it might not work out. But for me, I just found the whole thing really fascinating. And also I will say it's incredibly cheap as well. Once you get into making your own sauerkraut, you literally like buy a cabbage and some salt, and it might cost you about €2, or else you go in and you buy like a tiny jar of it for €8. And obviously, don't get me wrong, I do go for the convenient approach sometimes, and it's wonderful that these things are available. But the biggest, I think, a big block that people tend to have is they worry like, will it be expensive? Will I have to buy a whole load of different ingredients? And your first shop might be expensive, but otherwise, once you get things up and running, it's very reasonable. Things like, I go through phases, I'm not doing it at the moment, but like with my kombuchas, and it's so funny because you'd pay €4 a bottle, or else you can literally make it for like the price of 2 bags in your own home. And it's great to get those things up and running. So I found all the courses, honestly, I found them really, really fascinating, really creative, but also there was that lovely feeling of, you're going back to, like, I love now that everyone is really interested in sourdough and, these lovely traditional, there's something very comforting, I suppose, about returning back to, traditional methods and learning those kind of things that are, again, once you get them up and running, kind of simple, fail-safe things to have in your, repertoire.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that's interesting that you say, bringing it back to kind of the ancient traditions and, the old ways that used to be done. And I find in general, that's the way it is, even with the likes of meditation or mindfulness or all these things, that are coming up that people are thinking, these are new, and all these. they're
I know.
actually not. Everything, like we're kind of, and it's great that it's all been rehashed, because it's elevating everyone's perception of, you know, what's out there and kind of the connection and the universe, and it helps us tune into us as well. So it's really important that all these things are coming up as well. And like you say, I know there can be some small investment, even time wise, at the beginning. I know I have
Yeah.
my rye leaven now to make my own sourdough, but I have it going for months and
Wow.
months and months. Yeah, it was a simple recipe in one of the Happy Pears books. Like that, it is so easy to do. Like literally, it's water and the rye, but you just,
Yeah.
it takes a bit of work initially, you know, to get it going. But now it just goes, and I just feed it every now and again. It's like it's so easy, and like that, people sometimes scare themselves off in just making the start. But then when you start, you actually see, well, actually, it's not that difficult once you get it going. So it's fascinating. But then when you're on, because I imagine, you know, with everything going on with the cookbook and the menu at the
Yeah.
Merrion and everything else that you're doing, you know, how do you plan, say if you've got a packed schedule, or if you're on, you know,
Yes.
you're going to be on the road all day, how do you prepare,
Yes.
or what kind of go-tos do you have, or snacks in your bag? Or because I think that's where people often as well may fall down. And I know for me as well, I had to bring in a level of preparation when I knew I was going to be out and about all day, because, well, especially in the West, in Mayo, there's not as many
Yeah.
options as in Dublin. I knew I couldn't just pop into some place and pick up something.
Yeah.
So what kind of do you do to prepare, or what do you bring with you?
Do you know, I suppose the biggest thing is also it comes down to a practical side of things. Like now obviously it's wonderful that you can buy, you know, whether it's energy balls or you can go to lovely places like Sprout and get a salad or a juice, or it's very expensive. So I suppose the reality is that I prefer most of my own food as much as possible. But from a basic standpoint, the best thing I've been doing this year is I last year I got into a really good sleep routine, and then over Christmas I kind of fell out of it. And then I was on TV3, and there was a guy, Dr. Rangan Chatterjee, and he's fascinating. He's an amazing podcast all on sleep. But he gave me his book, and it's called The Four Pillars. And he works as a GP in the UK, and he just started to speak about the chronic effect that, you know, living a stressful lifestyle can have on illness, but also how simple things can really make a huge difference. So I think for me, the biggest thing is, you know, starting my day as well as I possibly can. And that really actually begins the night before at 10 p.m. And I've gotten quite strict about, I have a little, you can set it on an iPhone, I'm sure it's on other phones as well. It's called screen time, and from 9:30 a little thing will come up and it shuts down all the apps, and obviously you can turn them back on, but it kind of just gives you this like warning signal of, you know, why not switch this down. I turn off the Wi-Fi at night, and I really just try and just get as good a night's sleep as possible. Most mornings I'd start my day with a pint glass of water, and then I take apple cider vinegar in it, always through a straw. But I find just sticking to simple kind of routines and controlling what you can means that when the stuff that you can control, I'm more flexible about it. And
Yeah.
like at home, in terms of my own breakfasts, like at the moment, I'm making the kind of matchas. I'm really into like matcha tea or smoothies, the kind of ones that I'm making, if you were buying them out, they probably cost about 12 quid, because I have all my little, like, well, you know, whether it's my drops or I might put in some
Yeah.
coconut oil or different powders or things like that. And I find if I eat well in the morning, I'll just bring nuts or maybe some energy balls with
Mm.
me, and my keep cup, and I'll get, you know, I always bring tea bags. So if I'm somewhere where there's a kettle, I'll just make my own tea, and I control what you can, and then otherwise just go with the flow otherwise.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd always have snacks with me, but then again, I don't want to be carrying around a huge massive Tupperware. But I feel if I've had a good night's sleep, if I've started my day well, I tend to be able to be a little bit more flexible.
Yeah.
What I am trying to get better at is just being more consistent in terms of a routine, because what I think is really funny is, like, I think society constantly says all these things like, you know, treat yourself, sleep in, have a lie, and whereas personally, and I've spoken to a few people and they've agreed with me, I feel much better when I'm in a routine. I feel so much
Mm.
better when I get up and when I get out of the house, and when I don't sleep in, and when I don't pig out, and I feel much healthier and much well. So it sounds bizarre, but it's taken me 35 years to kind of realize that sometimes, you know, treating yourself to a massive pizza that's going to make you feel really sick afterwards isn't actually the best thing for me. And
Yeah.
actually, you know, not binging on like an entire series of Netflix until 3 a.m, which I have done before.
Yeah.
What I have kind of realized is almost like, it's so funny because when you think of babies, like everyone, they have lovely routines, but actually we almost, I feel, need to adopt a little bit of that into our lives. And definitely for me, adopting a really good sleep routine and getting up at pretty much the same time of the day just helps me feel so much better. And I find I don't get as stressed out
Yeah.
like years ago in terms of food. I might have worried, and I honestly don't know. I can kind of navigate things, and it takes a while to build up the confidence, I suppose, to say in restaurants or cafes, or is there anything you can do? And because for a while I felt really like, am I annoying them, am I bothering them? And
Yeah.
you're not,
Yeah.
you're really not. And I'd be embarrassed, especially kind of in groups of friends and things like that. But now obviously I've got the book out and things like
Yeah.
that, but what I've realized is take the 30 seconds and it's worth it, because it means you're going to enjoy your meal, and usually people are happy to help, but you can't expect them to read your mind.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, sleep, like you say, is vital. But again, it all comes back to, I think what you're talking about as well, is once we actually start to take responsibility for ourselves and
Yeah.
realize, like you're saying, control what we can control. And we can control how we start our day, whether we take 10 minutes for ourselves,
Yeah.
when we look at our phone, what we decide to eat, like they are all decisions that we actually do make. But it's again, it's creating that space that we think consciously about them. And I think, that's what happens naturally when you start shifting, to a more healthier mindset and lifestyle, and kind of connecting the dots that, well, hang on a second, I can kind of control things within a certain, but the way I look at it as well is I live my life by damage limitation. I look at it as in, this is my philosophy, that like we live in toxic environments at the end of the day. There's no two ways about it, between different kind of chemicals and products and cleaning products and foods and the food chain and the environment and air and pollution, depending where you live and whatnot. But that's the way it is. I'm like, I don't try to control that. What I control is what I put into me and on me, and my sleep and how I start my day, and yoga, and making sure that I am kind of in my prime. That then, like that, there is the flexibility, and I'm listening more. Like you say, a pizza. I remember when I came home from traveling just last year, my friends were like, oh my God, did you go to Supermax and this, that, and the other? Friends who are living abroad, like, they were dreaming of it. And I was like, no, I actually haven't. And they were like, why? That's all I want. And I was like, well, I actually don't crave it. Like, it's just my taste buds have changed so much as well, that it's not something that I dream about anymore, because I know consciously how it makes me feel as well, and it just zaps my energy. It makes me feel lethargic. So it's about that kind of awareness and taking responsibility for ourselves. And like you say, consistency is key as well. As they say, it's what we do daily has a way bigger impact than what we do once in a while, and that can work positively and negatively. So and
I think it's also getting to know yourself as well, though. And as I said, look, I was single around 30 when I started to watch all of these documentaries, and it was great because like if I was changing, it wasn't affecting anyone else. And sometimes people say to me like, oh, I live in a really busy house, what do I do? If I want to change my diet, will I, if they are the person who's preparing all the food, will I be making 3 or 4 dinners or whatever? But what I feel is I was really glad to have that time to kind of get to know me and go, actually, hang on a minute, how many of my habits are actually ones that feel good to me, or how many of them are just as a result of the people that I spend time with. And it's really funny if I think back on, in Friends, when Rachel starts smoking, because that's where the gossip starts to happen. And, so many of the things that the patterns that we can fall into can be as a result of the people that maybe are around us. Whereas if you pare it back and go, actually, wait a minute, what makes me really, really happy? And even if that is, a Netflix day, or if it's a walk or whatever, I think it's lovely to actually try and figure out what are the few things that I can put into my routine that'll make me feel really charged up. And for me, definitely it is the sleep. It's how I start my day. I have an app as well called Calm. It's similar to Headspace, but it's just 10-minute meditations. There's actually also 3-minute ones. And I find it just amazes me the difference that even 3 minutes sticking in my headphones, I just sit there and I'm like, oh, I feel so much better, But someone else might need something completely different. But it's lovely to kind of get to know actually what makes me feel great or happy, and kind of going with that rather than just, I suppose, in that kind of sheep-like way falling along in terms of whatever's being marketed at us directly. It's lovely to scale it back and go, hang on a minute, what do I really want? And I do think Instagram is great like that you're seeing so much kind of so many different personalities, and also you can kind of curate your news that you read. Like in a way, I think sometimes I get a little bit distorted because I follow so many different vegan food bloggers all over the world that then I like go out and I'm like, oh, actually it's not. It's not actually like that, but I think as a result now we can really curate kind of what makes us happy. We can listen to whatever podcast we want, whereas 20 or 30 years ago it was kind of mainstream news that everyone read the same thing. And it's great now that people can follow their passions much more.
Absolutely. And I totally agree. I love the power of the internet, for that. But again, it comes back to, because there are downsides as well. But again, it comes back to the individual and us being responsible for ourselves and what we put our attention to, because it is there and it can take every second of our day. And next thing we've wasted it all randomly scrolling. But if you're using it to your benefit and actively, researching and looking to see what others are doing, it is a powerful tool. And like you say as well, the benefit of getting to know yourself, that's even the intention behind this podcast. It's just people don't give sometimes the value of even 3 minutes, how powerful it can be just to have that quiet, that disconnect, because then you can really begin to tune into yourself and kind of feel, that's not doing it for me or whatever, just to create that space, because we do constantly respond to our environments. That's what we're doing. Like even they say with illness and whatnot, it's actually only 5% genetics and 95% is the environment, the lifestyle we're brought up in is accountable for a lot of the chronic diseases. So it's huge. But like that, what, you mentioned there as well, for anyone who is thinking about, making a shift or eating a more plant-based diet, what kind of tips would you give them? And I know it is a personal journey always, like people need to explore what works for them and what doesn't.
Absolutely.
There is no one size fits all, but any tips of where they could start or...
Oh, 100%. I mean, what I would always advise people to do is, start with adding something in and, go for something fun, go for whether it's a tray of brownies or a cake I think bring back the enjoyment of I used to love years ago just cooking on a Saturday, and I was in a family, so thankfully lots of people kind of were delighted to eat all the food. But I think if you're going over to a friend's house or one of the things I will always do is if I'm going to a party, I'll always bring a dish, and I'm thrilled to do it, but it's helped me improve my cooking, and also it's so gratifying if you see lots of people enjoying it. But I think the key thing for someone that I would advise them to do is initially start adding in rather than taking away, and start simple. Start with a smoothie, start with something that you think is going to look and taste absolutely delicious. Other bits of advice that I have are, get educated. It's really important. Take responsibility. Like I find sometimes at events and demonstrations, there might be teenagers in the house. And at that stage, once you are, I don't know, there's no specific age as to when you can start cooking your own food. But I think it's really important for people to be aware that if you at age 16 have decided that this is how you want to live your life, don't think that your whole family is going to, revolve around you. I think it's really important that if you've made a decision that it's not the normal, and that's just the reality is it's not, and it takes an education for someone to learn how do I actually cook 5 different dinners that happen to be vegan. And I think it's really important for people to take responsibility, whether it is maybe doing your own cooking, doing your own research in terms of recipes. Also nutritionally, I think it's really important to get support. So I would advise, what I do is I get my bloods tested. Any GP can do that, and they can just check your iron levels and things like that, because sometimes you can get very caught up in there's a lot of vegan junk food that people can live off if they want to, and that's not gonna be healthy any way, shape or form. But either way, it's kind of it's important to have a relationship medically, just to make sure that from a health standpoint you're doing the best you can as well. But I think the key thing is take responsibility, get educated, and don't think that everywhere should, and how dare they not have vegan options. I feel Gently does this, do it positively, and and just learn. I can't walk into most local corner shops and think that there's going to be a vegan bar of chocolate, because there's just not. So
But then when
You
there
just
is, you're like, oh, yay.
Yeah,
The
exactly. Or
little
else
surprise.
there might be, but it'll be 3 times more expensive than,
Yeah.
and so you kind of have to kind of accept that. I think some people get really surprised because when you get into this world, you're like, oh my God, this is amazing. But you do have to accept that it's a little bit antisocial and
Yeah.
equally, I think draw people in by how delicious your food looks, and whatever you do, don't be annoying. Like,
Yeah.
don't sit suddenly at the kitchen table and give out to people for eating sausages. If they want to
Yeah.
eat sausages, that's fine. The only person who, you can take accountability for is yourself. And I think that's really important for people to kind of remember, because everyone has these perceptions of like, oh, the really annoying vegan,
Yeah.
who's giving out to everyone. So please don't be that person.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you say, each to their own. Everyone has free will choice at the end of the day. We're not here to push
Absolutely.
anything, but adding in something fun or just exploring. If it's something that resonates with someone, just like you say, explore, add in something fun and baby steps and just see what happens. Have you found that it has just kind of overflowed into every aspect of your life through,
Yeah,
like, yes, what you eat, what we've been talking about, but things you buy, products, your
completely.
home.
It was so funny because I was thinking about this recently, and like for me personally, it felt kind of like I'd found the golden ticket. And I know that sounds really cheesy, but like all throughout my early 20s, maybe up until about 25, I constantly had, not bad, like, but I constantly had a bit of a breakout all along my jawline, my nose, the tops of my arms had loads of bumps. I usually felt kind of quite bloated. And it was so funny that I look back now and at 35, I feel so much healthier and, much more vibrant than I did at 25 as well. So definitely from an aesthetic point of view, I feel much better. I've much more energy. Like if you'd said to me at 25, like I didn't run, I didn't have any energy to, to exercise or anything like that. And I was, I was much kind of, my mood was much lower as well, whereas now I kind of feel so much more energetic. So from a physical standpoint, it's definitely felt much more positive. So, and then equally, I think like the food that I used to eat used to be quite kind of bland. Like I'd say my shop every week would have contained the exact same things. Like it would have always had mince, potatoes, onions, garlic, some sort of a pasta, tomato sauce, and maybe salmon fillets. And like now, pretty much each week I might be trying a different recipe or a different smoothie, or like there was fruits that I wasn't, kind of eating in Thailand that I didn't even know existed. And it's so for me, it's really broadened everything out. I definitely do feel much better, but I will say, and I think this is kind of what you were hinting at just there, is your sensitivity changes much, much more in terms of what I found was once I sort of, I suppose, cleaned up my diet, removed, processed foods and was cooking, I'd probably cook about 85% of my own food. Mm-hmm. You do become much more sensitive, I think, to what you eat, and simple things like air fresheners around the house or certain washing powders and products. I find they really irritate me now. So unfortunately, as your body becomes sensitive to all this gorgeous, delicious food, you also become sensitive to things that, you might not have noticed before and actually now suddenly seem quite toxic. So it's a gradual process and it's about finding what actually works. But now pretty much, like everything to my cleaning products would be, and obviously in terms of, first I started with my diet, but a lot of people aren't aware that like veganism is an entire lifestyle, and that would go down to not wearing leather, not going to a zoo, and all of your cosmetics. And definitely with things like my shoes and jumpers and things like that, it takes a while. But what I always say to people is, make the common sense choice. If you're going to wear a good pair of leather shoes for 2 years, you're better off buying them than ones that are made of plastic and are going to be, in the bin. And I think it's important for people to kind of remember that there's no one standing over your shoulder who's going to like dock points. But yeah, definitely it has kind of infiltrated a lot of different areas of my life. And then I think the great thing is that I feel very empowered having kind of changed my diet, I suppose. And now I think the next biggest thing that everyone seems to be so, concerned about is single-use plastics. And, it can be very empowering, I suppose, if something has been a habit and then if you've changed it. Like it's not difficult for me now to kind of navigate a menu or not eat meat or dairy or things that some people might go, oh my God, I don't know how you do that. But when you do it, you're like, okay, what's next? Why do we have so much plastic in the house? Why do we use so much of this? So it's kind of
your whole, like you say, your whole awareness, your sensitivity, it opens up your mind and you just see the higher perspective and kind of the bigger picture and kind of connect it all in. And like you say as well, I know for me as well, if it's a natural progression, it's not like you wake up in the morning and go, oh my God, out with everything bad and in with the youth. That's not sustainable either. But it is just, sitting with that curiosity, like exploring and just, tuning in and seeing what feels right for you. And I love as well, even from the health point of view, when people say, like you said, in your mid-20s, you just had no energy and whatnot. And I think most of us go through a phase of that, but we just accept it as, oh, this is just the norm, or this is the way it is and everyone's the same. But actually, once you start making the shifts, you see, well, no, it's not the norm. I actually just wasn't looking after myself. I wasn't giving my body the nutrients that it needed to be at its optimum and to perform and to be able to function properly. So I think that's been the bigger picture as well for me. But look, Holly, I've really enjoyed our conversation today. I know you're super busy in that, and I really appreciate you stopping by and chatting. But if people want to follow you, and I will post links as well in the show notes, if people want to follow you or get more information or look up for your cookbook, where should they go?
If you go to holly.ie, which is my website, I kind of have everything linked there. And then there's all my social icons. I'm hollywhite.ie on most things as well. So I kind of tend to update Instagram a bit. But then in terms of my website, twice a week, usually there's a new recipe up there and then some sort of piece of lifestyle content as well. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and I definitely tell people go check it out, because I know you've got YouTube videos and everything as well for recipes. And like that, your Instagram and everything is beautiful. So thank you so much. And definitely will get to the Merrion the next time I'm in Dublin to check out the menu, because it looks so great.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Great to talk.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Curiosity and Consciousness podcast with me, Karen Maloney. Be sure to like, subscribe and share the podcast if you have enjoyed it, and also pop over to www.karenmaloney.wellbeing.com and click podcasts for all the show notes and links.